In the winter skies over war-torn Europe, German fighter pilots had learned to respect many American aircraft. But there was one they feared above all others. They called it der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The Japanese had their own name for it. 2 planes, 1 pilot. To the Americans who flew it, it was simply the Lightning, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. And the story of how this revolutionary aircraft came to be is the story of a young engineer who refused to accept the word impossible. February 27, 1910. In the remote iron mining town of Ishpeming, Michigan, a boy named Clarence Leonard Johnson entered the world. His parents, Christine and Peter Johnson, were Swedish immigrants who had crossed the Atlantic from Malmö in the county of Scania, searching for the American dream. What they found was hard work, modest means, and 9 children to feed. Clarence was their 7th child, born into a family where poverty was not just a circumstance but a daily reality. The Johnson family struggled. Peter Johnson ran a small construction company that barely kept them afloat. Young Clarence watched his mother, Christine, take in laundry from wealthier families to make ends meet. He would deliver that wash on his wagon in summer, on his sled in winter. But Clarence was ashamed, deeply ashamed, of his family's poverty. On days when the streets were crowded, he kept to the back alleys, hoping no one would see him, hoping no one would know. He made himself a promise, a vow that would drive him for the rest of his life. One day, he would return to Ishpeming not on the back streets but on the best streets. One day the name he carried would mean something. But first he had to survive grade school. The name Clarence became a target for bullies, who mockingly called him Clara. Day after day the taunts continued. Day after day young Clarence endured, until one morning while waiting in line to enter a classroom, a boy named Cecil started the familiar routine. This time Clarence didn't walk away. He didn't ignore it. He tripped Cecil so hard that the boy broke his leg. When brought before the teacher and principal, young Clarence didn't apologize. He didn't cry. He stated plainly that he had done it on purpose. The ruler came down hard on his knuckles, but he didn't shed a tear. His classmates, impressed by his toughness, his refusal to back down, decided he needed a new name, something that fit a fighter. They started calling him Kelly, after a popular song of the time, Kelly with the green neck tie. The name stuck. Clarence was gone. Kelly Johnson was born. But Kelly Johnson wasn't just tough. He was brilliant. At 13 years old, he won a prize for his first aircraft design. He called it the Merlin I battle plane. This was just 7 years after the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, in an era when aviation was still considered miraculous, almost magical. Young Kelly devoured every Tom Swift novel he could find. Tom Swift and his airplane, Tom Swift and his electric car, Tom Swift and his submarine. He read until the pages wore thin, dreaming of the machines he would one day create. Aviation wasn't just a hobby for Kelly, it was an obsession, a calling, a way out of poverty and into prominence. A few weeks after designing his first aircraft, Kelly saw his first real airplane, a World War I Jenny biplane. Standing there in the field, watching it fly, watching it dance through the air with a grace that seemed impossible, his future crystallized in his mind. He knew what he wanted to do with his life. He was going to design airplanes, not fly them, design them. He wanted to be the one who imagined them into existence, who solved the impossible problems, who made the dreams real. The family moved to Flint, Michigan, where his father's construction business offered slightly better prospects. Kelly worked summers with his father, learning the value of hard work and precision craftsmanship. He also worked in the motor test section of the Buick Motor Car Company, saving every penny. When he tried to give his meager savings to an instructor at the Flint airport in exchange for flying lessons, the man looked at the money, looked at the eager boy standing before him, and shook his head. "Look, kid," he said, "save that money and go to school. You'll do more good there than up here." It was advice that would change aviation history. Kelly graduated from Flint Central High School in 1928, working his way through school with a determination that bordered on obsession. He enrolled at Flint Junior College, now known as Mott Community College, and finally at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor to study aeronautical engineering. This was the opportunity he had been working toward his entire young life. At Michigan, Kelly showed up early every morning, first through the doors of the engineering building, hungry for knowledge. The campus was beautiful, sprawling, majestic, everything his childhood in Ishpeming had not been. But for Kelly, the real beauty wasn't in the architecture or the tree-lined paths, it was in the faculty, in the distinguished professors who could teach him everything he needed to know about flight. He studied under Felix Pawlowski, who had worked in Russia with Igor Sikorsky on the world's first four-engine airplane and had trained with Alexandre Gustave Eiffel, designer of the Paris Tower. Pawlowski had brought Michigan its first wind tunnel and the inaugural aeronautical curriculum. Edward A. Stalker, head of the aeronautical department, helped Johnson plan his course of study and soon selected him as his student assistant. Kelly took on teaching fellowships, washed dishes in fraternity house kitchens, helped professors, and rented the university's wind tunnel in the East Engineering Building to run tests as a consultant. He tested models of Indianapolis racing cars, trains, and aircraft. He made more money that year than he would in any of his first 10 years working for Lockheed. But Kelly had little time for the normal college experience. He had one very good friend named Don Palmer. He went on exactly 2 dates in 3 years. He avoided alcohol during Prohibition, when homebrew flowed freely in boarding houses across campus. "I didn't have time for romance," he later said, "and I deliberately avoided any entanglement." He trudged across campus after dinner for more wind tunnel work, correcting papers for professors late into the night. Lonely times, he called them, but necessary times. Every sacrifice was bringing him closer to his goal. In 1932, Kelly received his Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering. He could have stopped there, could have started working immediately. But he stayed for 1 more year to complete his master's degree. It was during this final year that an opportunity arrived that would define his career, that would prove to the world what Kelly Johnson was capable of. Lockheed Corporation was developing a new twin-engine airliner called the Model 10 Electra. It was a revolutionary design for the time, all-metal construction, twin engines, modern and sleek. Lockheed was betting the company's future on this aircraft. They sent a model to Michigan for wind tunnel testing. Kelly and his professor Edward Stalker, along with a Lockheed representative, evaluated the model through extensive tests. Based on those tests, Kelly believed the Electra had serious longitudinal stability and directional control problems. He said so. But most aircraft of the day experienced similar issues, and both Stalker and the Lockheed representative decided the figures were acceptable. Kelly disagreed, but he was just a graduate student. What did he know compared to established professors and company engineers? Upon completing his master's degree in 1933, Johnson joined Lockheed Corporation as a tool designer in Burbank, California. His salary was $83 a month, roughly $1,500 in today's money. It wasn't much, but it was everything Kelly needed. He was inside. He was working for an aircraft company. He was on his way. Kelly could have stayed quiet, could have kept his head down, could have accepted his professors and the company's judgment about the Model 10 Electra. Elementary principles of office politics said that's exactly what he should do. But Kelly Johnson had never been one to stay quiet when he knew he was right. Within weeks of starting work, he approached Hall Hibbard, Lockheed's chief engineer, and told him the truth. "The Model 10 is unstable. My professor was wrong." Hibbard could have dismissed him. Here was a 23-year-old fresh graduate, just weeks on the job, contradicting not only Lockheed's own engineers but a university professor. Hibbard could have fired him on the spot, but something in Kelly's presentation, the way he reeled off coefficients, the strength of his grasp of practical aerodynamics, the absolute certainty in his voice, made Hibbard suppress any impulse to show the upstart the door. Instead, Hibbard sent the young apprentice back to the Michigan wind tunnel with the big Electra model crammed into the back seat of his car. "Prove it," Hibbard said. Kelly conducted 72 separate wind tunnel runs, 72 tests, each one carefully documented, each one proving what he knew in his gut. The Model 10 Electra, as designed, was dangerous. He removed the model's large wing root fairings. He replaced its central vertical fin with smaller ovals set at the tips of the horizontal stabilizer, a twin-tail design. It was a natural arrangement for a twin-engine airplane, ensuring that if one engine failed, the slipstream of the other would be blowing over one rudder, helping to keep the airplane flying straight. Kelly's modifications, including adding an H-shaped tail configuration, solved the airplane's stability problems completely. Kelly Johnson returned to Burbank something of a hero. At 23 years old, he had saved the Model 10 Electra. Lockheed's bet on their future was secure. The twin-tail design he created would become a signature Lockheed design, repeated in other Lockheed models for years to come. Kelly was promoted from tool designer to aeronautical engineer, joining the ranks of Lockheed's engineering department. Hall Hibbard, the chief engineer who could have fired him, instead became his mentor and champion. Hibbard recognized genius when he saw it, and he was looking at genius. Kelly Johnson had gotten Lockheed's attention. Now he would show them what he could really do. One of those Model 10 Electras would later be flown by Amelia Earhart on her ill-fated around-the-world expedition in 1937. The Model 10 went on to be a commercial success, becoming the first aircraft to perform a round-trip commercial flight over the Atlantic Ocean. Kelly's contributions to the design of other aircraft followed rapidly. After assignments as flight test engineer, stress analyst, aerodynamicist, and weight engineer, he became chief research engineer in 1938 at the age of just 28, February 1937. The storm clouds of war were gathering over Europe. Adolf Hitler's Germany, in flagrant violation of the Treaty of Versailles, had been secretly rearming for years. The Luftwaffe was growing stronger by the month, with modern aircraft that outclassed most of what the democracies could field. In Washington, military planners were beginning to understand that America's isolation, protected by two vast oceans, would not protect it forever. The United States Army Air Corps needed new fighters, and they needed them fast. They needed fighters that could compete with anything the Germans or Japanese could put in the air. In February 1937, the Army Air Corps released Specification X608. It was a daunting requirement, unlike anything American aviation had seen before. The specification called for a high-altitude interceptor that could reach speeds of at least 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet and have a maximum speed of at least 400 miles per hour. It needed to climb to 20,000 feet in just 6 minutes. It needed an endurance of 1 hour at maximum power. It needed range, it needed power, and it needed heavy armament capable of destroying enemy bombers. These were the toughest specifications the Air Corps had ever issued. Most aircraft companies looked at the requirements and understood immediately. No single engine available in 1937 could produce enough power to meet these demands. It was impossible. At Lockheed, Hall Hibbard assembled a design team. Leading it was the young engineer who had already saved the Model 10, Kelly Johnson, now just 27 years old. Working alongside him was Lieutenant Benjamin S. Kelsey from Wright Field, Ohio, the Air Corps' project officer, who would later become a brigadier general. Johnson and his team sat down and began sketching configurations. They went through design after design, exploring every possibility. Conventional wisdom said you built a fighter around a single fuselage with wings and a tail, with the engine in the nose or the middle. But conventional wisdom couldn't meet these specifications. The engines of 1937 simply weren't powerful enough. Kelly Johnson started thinking differently. If one engine couldn't do the job, they'd use two powerful Allison V17 Tessa engines, each capable of producing 1,000 horsepower with turbo superchargers for high-altitude performance. But how do you build a twin-engine fighter that's fast enough, maneuverable enough, deadly enough? Traditional twin-engine designs were heavy, sluggish, meant for bombers or reconnaissance aircraft, not air-to-air combat. Kelly's solution was radical, unlike anything that had been built before. Instead of mounting the engines on the wings of a conventional fuselage, he would extend the engine nacelles backward into long booms. These booms would carry the tail assembly, twin vertical stabilizers and rudders. Between the booms, in a sleek central nacelle or gondola, would sit the pilot with excellent visibility, and all the armament would be clustered in the nose of that central nacelle for devastating concentrated firepower. No convergence problems like wing-mounted guns, just a straight stream of bullets and cannon shells going exactly where the pilot pointed the aircraft. The propellers would counter-rotate, one spinning clockwise, one counterclockwise, eliminating the torque problems that plagued single-engine fighters and made them pull to one side. It would have a tricycle landing gear, practically unheard of in fighters at the time, giving the pilot better visibility on the ground and during takeoff and landing. The turbo superchargers would give it exceptional high-altitude performance. When military advisors first saw Johnson's sketches, many considered the design risky, even foolish. It looked like something cobbled together, like 3 different aircraft merged into one ungainly machine. Some called it junk, some laughed. Twin booms, a central nacelle, tricycle landing gear. This wasn't a fighter, this was a flying experiment that would get pilots killed. Fighters were supposed to be simple, rugged, traditional. This was none of those things. But Kelly Johnson believed in his numbers. He believed in his wind tunnel tests. He believed in the design with every fibre of his being. The mathematics didn't lie. The aerodynamics were sound. It would work. On June 23, 1937, Lockheed won the competition with its Model 22. The Army Air Corps contracted them to build a prototype, designated XP-38, for $163,000, though Lockheed's actual cost would exceed $761,000. But that didn't matter to Kelly Johnson or to Lockheed. This wasn't about money. This was about proving something could be done that everyone said was impossible. Construction began in July 1938. But where do you build a revolutionary fighter aircraft in complete secrecy? Lockheed found the perfect location, an old bourbon distillery they had purchased, known as the 3G Distillery or 3G. The location was secure, remote from Lockheed's main factory, perfect for keeping secrets from competitors and potential enemies. The smell of bourbon mash still lingered in the buildings, barrels of aging whiskey still stored in parts of the facility. But Kelly Johnson and his team didn't care about the smell. They cared about the work. Kelly Johnson would later identify this bourbon distillery as the first of 5 Lockheed Skunk Works locations, the legendary secret development facility that would later produce some of America's most advanced aircraft. In this ramshackle former distillery, with the smell of bourbon in the air, American aviation history was being made. Kelly set his team apart from the rest of the factory in a walled-off section, off-limits to all but those directly involved. Secretly, advanced features were being incorporated into the new fighter, a significant structural revolution in which the aluminum skin of the aircraft was joggled, fitted, and flush-riveted. This design innovation wasn't called for in the Army's specification, but Kelly knew it would yield less aerodynamic drag and give greater strength with lower mass. Every detail mattered. Every innovation brought them closer to the 400-mile-per-hour goal. January 27th, 1939. A cold morning in California. Ben Kelsey, the Army Air Corps' test pilot and the XP-38's project officer, climbed into the cockpit of the finished aircraft. The XP-38 sat on the tarmac at March Field like nothing anyone had ever seen. 2 engines jutting forward on long booms, sleek and powerful, a central pod between them housing the pilot, twin tails rising at the back like the prongs of a devil's fork. It looked fast, sitting still. It looked dangerous. It looked like the future. Kelly Johnson stood nearby, watching, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything he had designed, everything he had promised, everything he had bet his reputation on came down to this moment. Kelsey started the engines. The Allison V-1710s roared to life with a deep, powerful sound unlike anything in the American inventory. He taxied down the runway, the tricycle landing gear working perfectly, giving him excellent forward visibility. He advanced the throttles. The XP-38 accelerated rapidly, faster than Kelsey expected. He lifted off. The XP-38 flew. It flew beautifully. It was fast, incredibly fast. It was stable. It was maneuverable. The controls responded crisply. Kelly Johnson's impossible design worked. Standing on the ground, watching his creation climb into the sky, Kelly felt a moment of pure triumph. He had done it. Over the next 2 weeks, test flights continued. The XP-38 exceeded every expectation. Then, on February 11th, 1939, General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Corps, approved a demonstration flight that would showcase America's new fighter to the world. The XP-38 would fly from California to New York, attempting to break the transcontinental speed record. It was a publicity stunt, yes, but it was also a statement. American aviation could compete with anyone in the world. American engineering could create aircraft as advanced as anything flying in Germany or Britain or Japan. Ben Kelsey took off from Marchfield in California at 10:15 a.m. Pacific time. He blazed across the continent, the XP-38 performing flawlessly. Over the deserts of California and Arizona, over the plains of Kansas and Missouri, Over the Appalachian Mountains, the Lightning flew at speeds that left chase planes far behind. 7 hours, 2 minutes, and 40 seconds after takeoff, Kelsey was descending toward Mitchell Field on Long Island, New York. The speed record was broken by a wide margin. The flight was a triumph. The newspapers would be filled with stories about America's new 400-mile-per-hour fighter. Then, on final approach just minutes from landing, disaster struck. Carburetor icing, ice forming in the engine's fuel delivery system, robbed both engines of power simultaneously. The XP-38 lost thrust. Kelsey tried to restart the engines, tried everything he knew. Nothing worked. He was gliding, descending rapidly, too low to bail out. He aimed for a golf course at Mitchell Field. The XP-38 crash-landed, ploughing across the fairway. Kelsey walked away with only minor injuries, but the prototype was destroyed. The only XP-38 in existence, twisted wreckage scattered across a golf course. Kelly Johnson was devastated. Months of work, hundreds of thousands of dollars, the proof that his design worked, all destroyed in an instant by a simple mechanical problem. He had been so close to complete vindication. Now he had nothing but wreckage. But within days, as the shock wore off, Kelly realized something remarkable was happening. The newspapers were filled with stories about the Army's new 400-mile-per-hour fighter that had broken the transcontinental speed record. Congress was paying attention. The public was fascinated. The crash, rather than being seen as a failure, had given the P-38 more publicity than a successful flight ever could have. Everyone wanted to know about this revolutionary aircraft. Everyone wanted to know when it would be ready. On April 27, 1939, the Army Air Corps ordered 13 YP-38 pre-production test aircraft. The P-38 Lightning was born. Kelly Johnson's impossible design would become reality. September 17, 1940. The first YP-38 took to the skies. It was heavier than the destroyed prototype, with improved engines producing 150 horsepower each, larger radiators to handle the increased heat, and a complete weapons package. The armament was devastating. One Oldsmobile-built 37mm automatic cannon and 4 Browning 50 caliber M2 machine guns, all mounted in the nose of the central nacelle. Unlike wing-mounted guns that had to be set to converge at a specific distance, the P-38's nose-mounted weapons fired in perfect parallel. A skilled pilot could hit targets at ranges up to 1,000 yards, with all 5 weapons striking the same point. It was a flying gun platform unlike anything in the sky, but the Lightning had problems that would plague it throughout its combat career. During high-speed dives, especially when approaching Mach 0.68, about 520 miles per hour at altitude, the aircraft's tail would shake violently in what pilots called tail flutter. The nose would tuck under in what became known as Mach tuck, and the elevator controls would lock up, trapping the pilot in a deadly dive. The center of pressure on the wing was moving backward toward the tail in high-speed flight, changing the aircraft's flight characteristics in ways that were barely understood in 1940. Many pilots bailed out rather than ride it down. Others stayed with the aircraft, fighting the controls, praying they could recover in denser air at lower altitude when the speed decreased. Some made it, others didn't, their P-38s auguring into the ground at terminal velocity. Lockheed engineers, led by Kelly Johnson, worked frantically to understand and fix the problem. In February 1943, they developed quick-acting dive flaps that extended downward from the wings in 1.5 seconds. These flaps didn't act as speed brakes to slow the aircraft. Instead, they affected the pressure distribution across the wing in a way that retained the wing's lift and prevented compressibility from locking the controls. It was an elegant solution to a deadly problem. But by late 1943, only a few hundred dive flap field modification kits had been assembled and distributed to P-38s in North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. Many P-38s never received the modification. Many pilots died not knowing that a solution existed, but war was coming fast and there was no time for perfection. By 1941, the P-38 was entering full-scale production. Nearly 10,000 Lightnings would eventually be built by Lockheed and Consolidated Vultee. They would serve in every theatre of World War II, from the frozen Aleutian Islands to the sun-baked deserts of North Africa, from the jungles of the South Pacific to the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany. Their story would be complicated, a mix of triumph and struggle, of pilots who loved the aircraft and pilots who feared it, of missions that made history and missions that ended in tragedy. August 14th, 1942. The United States had been at war for 8 months, still reeling from the devastation of Pearl Harbor, still finding its footing against experienced, deadly enemies. Over the cold waters of the North Atlantic near Iceland, 2 American fighters were on patrol, a P-38F Lightning flown by Second Lieutenant Elza Shahan and a P-40C Warhawk. Through the clouds they spotted a massive 4-engine Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, a German patrol bomber prowling for Allied convoys to direct U-boat attacks. The Condor crew spotted the American fighters and tried to run, pushing their aircraft to its maximum speed. But it was too slow, too cumbersome against the sleek P-38. Shahan's Lightning closed the distance rapidly. He opened fire. The concentrated firepower from his nose-mounted guns, the 37mm cannon and 4x50 caliber machine guns, tore into the German aircraft. The Condor caught fire. The P-40 delivered additional blows. The FUS-200 went down into the cold Atlantic, trailing smoke and flame. It was the first Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed by the United States Army Air Forces in World War II. Kelly Johnson's junk plane had drawn first blood. November 1942, North Africa. The sands of the Sahara were about to run red. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, was underway. The 1st and 14th Fighter Groups arrived with their P-38s to support the operation, to establish air superiority over the battlefield. The Lightning pilots were eager, confident in their aircraft's superiority. They had the newest American fighter, the fastest, the most powerful. They were about to face the Luftwaffe in earnest for the first time. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that their German opponents were veterans, men who had been flying combat missions for months or years, who had honed their skills over the skies of France, Britain and Russia. Men with dozens of kills. Men who knew how to kill. November the 28th, 1942. A formation of P-38s encountered Messerschmitt Bf 109s from Jagdgeschwader 53, Fighter Wing 53, one of the Luftwaffe's elite units. When the smoke cleared and the surviving aircraft returned to base, 7 Lightnings had been shot down. The Bf 109s suffered no losses. It was the first major German success against the P-38, and it wouldn't be the last. Throughout December 1942 and into January 1943, German pilots continued to shoot down P-38s at alarming rates. The Lightning pilots were brave. No one could question their courage, but they were inexperienced, and they were tied to close escort tactics that kept them glued to bomber formations, making them easy targets for German fighters attacking from above with energy and altitude advantage. The leading Bf 109 pilots who scored victories against the P-38 had an average of 46 kills before they ever encountered a Lightning. These were elite pilots, predators in the sky who knew every trick, every tactic, every advantage. Franz Schiess became known as the leading Lightning killer in the Luftwaffe, credited with 17 P-38 kills during his combat career. Herbert Rollwage, Herbert Kaiser, Johann Pichler, Kurt Bühligen, these were aces with scores of victories. They studied the P-38, learned its weaknesses, and exploited them ruthlessly. Kurt Bühligen, who would end the war with 112 victories, later recalled with brutal honesty, "The P-38 fighter was easy to burn. Once in Africa we were 6 and met 8 P-38s and shot down 7. The Lightning's size made it less manoeuvrable than the nimble Bf 109. Its fuel tanks, despite being self-sealing, could still catch fire under concentrated attack. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most famous aces and later commander of the Luftwaffe's fighter forces, was unimpressed with the Lightning when he encountered it. He compared it unfavourably to Germany's own twin-engine fighter, the Messerschmitt Bf 110, declaring that German single-engine fighters were clearly superior in combat. German pilots nicknamed the P-38 not just the fork-tailed devil, but also, less respectfully, the sitting duck, or der doppelschwänzige Freudenheber, the twin-tailed joy-raiser, because it was supposedly easy to shoot down. The losses mounted horrifically. The 14th Fighter Group was so badly reduced in December 1942 that the 82nd Fighter Group had to be flown in from England just to cover the shortage of aircraft and pilots. American pilots were dying, shot down by more experienced opponents who had every tactical advantage. Some historians would later estimate that Bf-109 pilots established a kill ratio of nearly 3 P-38s destroyed for every Bf-109 lost in air combat over North Africa during late 1942 and early 1943. Kelly Johnson's revolutionary design was being shot out of the sky. But there was another side to this story. While the P-38s were taking terrible losses in air-to-air combat, they were accomplishing their missions. American bombers were getting through to their targets. German supply lines were being interdicted. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109 units, despite their impressive kill ratios, were failing to stop the American air campaign. They couldn't be everywhere at once. And gradually, painfully, as American pilots gained experience, as tactics evolved from rigid close escort to more flexible fighter sweeps, the tide began to turn. By February 1943, P-38 pilots were given more freedom to engage enemy fighters aggressively rather than staying glued to the bombers. They learned to use the Lightning's advantages: superior speed, devastating firepower, ability, to absorb battle damage and continue flying. The losses began to balance out. Some American pilots became aces. The Lightning was learning to fight, and its pilots were learning to survive. But it was in the Pacific theatre, among the islands and vast ocean expanses of the South Pacific and Southwest Pacific, where the P-38 Lightning truly proved itself. The requirements there were different from Europe. The vast distances, the long overwater flights where an engine failure meant certain death, the need for range and reliability above everything else. This was where Kelly Johnson's twin-engine design showed its genius. General George C. Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force in New Guinea, and later the Far East Air Force, couldn't get enough P-38s. They became his favourite fighter, the weapon he demanded again and again. "We needed kids like this lad," Kenney said about the P-38 pilots arriving in theatre. When the 39th Fighter Squadron of the 35th Fighter Group arrived in Australia in November 1942 with their Lightnings, trading in their Bell P-39 Airacobras for the twin-engine fighters, they established local air superiority with their first combat action on December 27, 1942. That first engagement was a revelation. The 39th Fighter Squadron claimed 11 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of only one P-38F. 2 of those kills were claimed by a young pilot named Richard Irabong. It was the beginning of a legend. The P-38 had advantages in the Pacific that weren't as apparent over Europe. Japanese fighters like the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0 were fast and incredibly maneuverable, able to turn inside almost any Allied fighter at low speeds. But they lacked armour protection and self-sealing fuel tanks, weight-saving measures that made them agile but vulnerable. A few hits from a P-38's concentrated firepower could set them ablaze, the unprotected fuel tanks erupting in flames that gave the pilots seconds to bail out or die. The Lightning's twin engines meant pilots could limp home on one engine after battle damage, a life-saving feature over vast expanses of ocean where ditching meant drowning or being eaten by sharks. The P-38's turbo-supercharged engines gave it decisive altitude advantages over most Japanese aircraft, allowing Lightning pilots to engage on their terms, diving down from above in slashing attacks. And with advice from an unlikely source, aviation legend Charles Lindbergh himself, who visited combat units in the Pacific and taught pilots fuel conservation techniques, P-38s could reach combat ranges of 550 miles or more. American pilots in the Pacific learned to use boom and zoom tactics, staying high, diving down on Japanese formations with superior speed, delivering devastating firepower, then using their speed and climb rate to zoom back up to altitude before the more maneuverable Japanese fighters could turn to engage. When compared with the Zero, one P-38 pilot noted, the Lightning came off badly in terms of maneuverability at medium and low altitudes. If a P-38 tried to outturn a Zero at low altitude, it usually ended up second best. But when the unique attributes of the Lightning were used to best effect, the superior speed, the heavy firepower, the ability to choose when and where to fight, the results were devastating. The top American aces of World War II flew P-38 Lightnings in the Pacific. Major Richard Irabong shot down all 40 of his aerial victories in a Lightning, becoming America's ace of aces. Born in Superior, Wisconsin in 1920, Bong had been captivated by mail planes flying overhead as a child. He learned to fly through the civilian pilot training program and joined the Army Air Forces in January 1942, earning his wings and commission. After training on the P-38 at Hamilton Field in California, where he famously buzzed his girlfriend's house in San Francisco and performed an unauthorized barrel roll over the Golden Gate Bridge, Bong was assigned to the Pacific Theater. Bong's skills as a fighter pilot were immediately apparent. His ability to outmaneuver enemy planes, combined with his deep understanding of the P-38's capabilities, made him extremely effective. Bong flew directly at his targets to ensure he hit them, sometimes flying through the debris of aircraft he'd just destroyed. On one occasion, he actually collided with an enemy aircraft, which was claimed as a probable victory. General Kenny called him one of the kids the Air Force needed. By December 1944, Bong had become a national hero, awarded the Medal of Honor by General Douglas MacArthur himself. Major Thomas Maguire from Ridgewood, New Jersey, scored 38 kills in his P-38, making him America's second-ranking ace. Known for his aggressive flying style and strategic approach to combat, Maguire studied enemy tactics constantly, always looking for an advantage. He and Bong engaged in a friendly rivalry, a race of aces, each pushing the other to greater achievements. Maguire was on track to surpass Bong's total when tragedy struck. On January 7, 1945, Maguire led a 4-plane fighter sweep over the Philippines. They encountered a lone Japanese Ki-43 Oscar, flown by Warrant Officer Akira Sugimoto, an instructor pilot with over 3,000 hours of experience. In the twisting dogfight that followed, Maguire violated his own dictates: never engage at low altitude, never turn with Japanese fighters, in an effort to draw the enemy pilot off his wingman. At just 300 feet altitude, Maguire's P-38 stalled during a tight turn. The lightning snapped into the ground. Maguire died instantly. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The race of aces was over. Colonel Charles Mack MacDonald scored 27 victories flying the Lightning, taking third place among American aces. Other Pacific P-38 aces included Gerald Johnson with 22 kills, Jay Robbins with 22, Thomas Lynch with 20, and dozens more. The Lightning had swept the gold, silver, and bronze medals of Pacific aces. The aircraft that German pilots called a sitting duck was destroying Japanese fighters at an astounding rate. April 18, 1943. This date would make the P-38 legendary, cementing its place in history. American intelligence services, specifically the codebreakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, had intercepted and decoded a message revealing that Admiral Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet and architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, would be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville to inspect forward bases. The message included his exact itinerary, departure time, arrival time, even the number and type of escort fighters. It was an intelligence windfall. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, wanted Yamamoto dead. President Franklin Roosevelt approved the mission. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox reportedly said, "Get Yamamoto." But there was a problem, a massive problem. Yamamoto would be flying 420 miles from Rabaul, deep in Japanese-controlled territory. No American fighter had the range to fly that distance, intercept the target, fight through enemy fighters, and return home. No fighter except one. 18 P-38, Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron, based at Guadalcanal, were selected for Operation Vengeance. 16 would make the actual mission, 4 as the killer flight, 12 as cover. 2 would be spares in case of mechanical failures. Major John Mitchell, the squadron operations officer, would lead the mission. Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr. and First Lieutenant Rex Barber would be the primary shooters. The mission planning was meticulous. Mitchell plotted a course that would keep the P-38s low over the water, below Japanese radar coverage, for the entire 420-mile flight. They would fly at wave-top level, navigating by dead reckoning and timing, with no radio communication that might alert the enemy. The timing had to be perfect. Arrive too early and Yamamoto would be warned and turn back. Arrive too late and he'd land safely. They had a window of perhaps 2 minutes. April 18th dawned clear. The P-38s took off at 7:25 a.m., formed up, and headed northwest at just 50 feet above the waves. For nearly 2 hours they flew in complete radio silence, trusting Mitchell's navigation. Every pilot knew that if they got lost over this expanse of ocean, they'd run out of fuel and die. At 9:43 a.m., Mitchell's calculations proved perfect. They were exactly where they needed to be, right on schedule. At 9:34 a.m., Yamamoto's transport had taken off from Rabaul, a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber painted in the green camouflage of the 705th Kokutai, with 6 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters as escort. A second Betty carried members of Yamamoto's staff. The formation flew at low altitude toward Bougainville, the Admiral sitting in the passenger cabin behind the co-pilot reviewing papers. At 9:43 a.m., the P-38s spotted the enemy formation. Mitchell's timing was perfect. They had arrived within 60 seconds of the predicted intercept time. But now the easy part was over. Now came the killing. The P-38s climbed to attack. The Zeros saw them and dove to defend. Captain Lanfear and his wingman, Lieutenant Rex Barber, separated from the formation and went after the bombers while the other P-38s engaged the Zeros. What happened in the next few minutes would be debated for decades, with both Lanfear and Barber claiming credit for shooting down Yamamoto's Betty. Lanfear later claimed he shot down the first Betty, the one carrying Yamamoto, seeing it crash into the jungle. Barber claimed he was the one who delivered the fatal shots. Analysis of Japanese records, witness statements, and gun camera footage suggested Barber's claim was more credible. He attacked Yamamoto's Betty from behind, his concentrated firepower tearing into the bomber's right engine and fuselage. The Betty, trailing smoke and fire, crashed into the jungle of Bougainville. The second Betty was also shot down, crashing into the water. One P-38 was lost in the engagement. Japanese search parties found Yamamoto's body the next day, still strapped in his seat, thrown clear of the wreckage. He had been hit twice by 50 caliber bullets. One had entered his left shoulder blade, exited through his right eye, and lodged in his left eye socket. The other had hit him in the left side of his jaw. The architect of Pearl Harbor was dead, killed by Kelly Johnson's fork-tailed devil. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was devastating. Yamamoto had been considered irreplaceable, a strategic genius. His death was a blow to morale from which many units never recovered. The Americans kept the mission secret for several weeks to protect their code-breaking capabilities, but when the news finally broke, it electrified the American public. The P-38 Lightning had accomplished what seemed impossible. But back in Europe, the Lightning story remained troubled and complex. When P-38 combat groups were rushed to England in the fall of 1943 to help stem the disastrous losses American bombers were suffering over Germany, they faced conditions their Pacific counterparts never encountered. The winter of 1943-44 was one of the bitterest on record. At high altitudes over Germany, often 25,000 to 30,000 feet, temperatures plunged to 40, 50, even 60 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The human body wasn't meant to endure such cold. Neither, it turned out, was the P-38. The Lightning's Allison engines, designed in sunny California and tested in moderate climates consistently through connecting rods, swallowed valves, and fouled spark plugs in the extreme cold. The intercoolers, systems designed to cool the compressed air from the turbochargers, ruptured under sustained high boost pressure. Turbocharger regulators froze, sometimes causing catastrophic failures that could tear an engine apart. Coolant lines froze. Oil thickened to the consistency of tar. Cockpit heaters, never designed for such extreme conditions, barely worked. Pilots returned from missions with frostbite on their hands, feet and faces despite their heated suits. No other Allison-powered aircraft operated at such high altitudes over Europe for extended periods. The P-40, P-39 and P-51A all used Allison engines, but they operated at lower altitudes or in warmer climates. The P-38 was pushing the Allison V-1710 beyond its design envelope, and the engine was failing. Abort rates were catastrophic. Missions where 30 or 40% of the P-38s turned back with mechanical failures before even reaching the target area. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. Every fighter that turned back was one less gun protecting the bombers, one less aircraft to engage the Luftwaffe. The Lightning was also challenged by the escort tactics the Army Air Forces stubbornly employed through much of 1943 and into 1944. Tied to close bomber formations, forbidden from pursuing enemy fighters that attacked and then broke away, the P-38s couldn't exploit their strengths: superior speed in level flight, devastating firepower, good high-altitude performance when the engines were working properly. German fighters, especially the superb Focke-Wulf FW-190s and the improved Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs, would dive down from 30,000 or 35,000 feet, make slashing attacks on the bombers, and zoom away before the Lightnings could respond effectively. The FW-190 in particular was faster than the P-38 at many altitudes and could outdive it. Many American fighter pilots found the P-38's size and complexity intimidating. It was big, much bigger than a P-51 Mustang or a P-47 Thunderbolt. It had 2 engines to manage, 2 throttles, 2 sets of instruments to monitor. The twin-boom configuration was unusual, the handling characteristics different from single-engine fighters. Some pilots never trusted it, never became comfortable with it. Others mastered it and loved it, learning to use its unique characteristics to their advantage. Captain Robin Olds, who would later become a legendary fighter race with victories in both World War II and Vietnam, got his first 5 kills flying a P-38 over Europe in 1944. He learned to love the Lightning, learned its quirks and capabilities, learned how to coax performance out of it even in terrible conditions, but Olds acknowledged it was demanding, unforgiving of mistakes. In the cold skies over Germany, flying a temperamental twin-engine fighter with mechanical issues and facing veteran Luftwaffe pilots who knew every trick, the P-38 struggled to live up to its reputation. The Army Air Forces became ambivalent about the Lightning in Europe. When the P-51 Mustang arrived, equipped with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that handled cold weather far better than the Allison, with exceptional range thanks to its efficient design and drop tanks, and with simpler single-engine operation, most P-38 groups in the 8th Air Force eagerly transitioned to the Mustang. The 20th, 55th, and 364th Fighter Groups all converted from P-38s to P-51s. Only the 474th Fighter Group, operating with the 9th Air Force on mostly ground attack missions at lower altitudes, where the engines were more reliable, flew the Lightning from arrival until war's end in Europe. The historical consensus on the P-38 in Europe is mixed. Warren M. Bodie, Kelly Johnson's biographer, and perhaps the world's foremost P-38 expert, acknowledged that the Lightning achieved mixed results in combat over Northern Europe. He believed it should have been re-engined with Packard-built Merlin engines, as the P-51 was, to improve high-altitude reliability and cold weather performance. But the war moved too fast for such fundamental redesigns. The P-38 fought in Europe with the engines it had, and those engines, magnificent in the Pacific, struggled in the frozen skies over Germany. Yet for all its struggles in Europe, the P-38 Lightning left an indelible mark on history that extends far beyond aerial combat. Nearly 10,000 Lightnings were produced between 1941 and 1945. About 400 of those served as photo reconnaissance aircraft, the F-4 and F-5 variants with cameras replacing guns. These unarmed Lightnings flew alone deep into enemy territory, relying entirely on speed and altitude to survive. They couldn't fight back, they couldn't defend themselves. All they could do was fly fast, fly high, and take pictures. These reconnaissance Lightnings provided some of the war's most crucial intelligence. They photographed German industrial facilities, transportation networks, troop concentrations, fortifications. They mapped invasion beaches for D-Day. They tracked the movement of German armour. They found V-weapon launch sites. Some of the most dangerous missions of the war were flown by these unarmed F-5 pilots, alone over enemy territory, knowing that if they were caught, they would die. One such pilot was Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the famous French author of The Little Prince, who disappeared on July 31st, 1944, while flying a reconnaissance mission over the Mediterranean in an F-5. His aircraft was never found during the war, though wreckage was later discovered decades later off the coast of Marseille. Some P-38s were converted to droop snoot configurations, with a bombardier position installed in the nose replacing the guns. These modified Lightnings would lead formations of bomb-laden P-38s on precision strikes, the bombardier in the lead aircraft sighting the target and releasing his bombs, with all the other P-38s in the formation releasing simultaneously. It was an innovative use of fighters as light bombers, bringing precision bombing capability to tactical targets. Others became night fighters with radar installations, the P-38M variant, which appeared late in the war. With a second crew member operating the radar in a raised position behind the pilot, these night-fighting Lightnings hunted in the darkness. Still others were modified for specialized roles, pathfinders with radar for leading bomber formations through clouds, weather reconnaissance aircraft, even experimental platforms for testing new technologies. The Lightning proved remarkably adaptable. Fighter, fighter-bomber, reconnaissance platform, pathfinder, night fighter, even air ambulance in some instances. It was whatever the mission required, whatever the war demanded, and the numbers tell their own story. According to official US Air Force records, P-38 Lightnings shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other Allied fighter in the Pacific Theater. More than the P-51 Mustang, more than the F-4U Corsair, more than the P-47 Thunderbolt. In air-to-air combat across all theaters, P-38s were credited with destroying over 2,600 enemy aircraft. The German Luftwaffe may have shot down more P-38s than they lost to them over Europe, but they failed to stop the American strategic bombing campaign. The missions got through, the war was won, and the Lightning played its part. Kelly Johnson didn't stop with the P-38. That radical design, created when he was just in his 20s, was only the beginning of a career that would span 4 decades and revolutionize aviation. In June 1943, Colonel M.S. Roth from Wright Field approached Johnson at Eglin Field in Florida with urgent classified news. American intelligence had discovered that the Germans were developing operational jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, when it entered service, would be faster than any propeller-driven fighter in existence. America needed its own jet fighter, and it needed it fast. Could Lockheed design and build a jet fighter in 6 months? It seemed impossible. A completely new propulsion system, new aerodynamics, new everything. Kelly Johnson said yes. Working in a makeshift facility, a rented circus tent erected next to a plastics factory in Burbank, Johnson and a hand-picked team of just 23 engineers and support staff designed and built the XP-80 Shooting Star in just 143 days. The facility, located next to the plastics factory that produced a smell reminiscent of the comic strip character's hideout, became known as the Skunk Works, a name that would become legendary in aviation circles. It was the same philosophy Johnson had used for the P-38, small team, minimal bureaucracy, close cooperation between designers and builders, and the freedom to innovate without interference. The XP-80 first flew on January 8, 1944. It was America's first operational jet fighter, capable of speeds over 500 miles per hour. It arrived too late to see combat in World War II, but it proved the concept and established the Skunk Works methodology that would define advanced aircraft development for generations. Over the next 4 decades, Kelly Johnson would design or contribute to more than 40 aircraft, many of them so advanced they seemed like science fiction when they were built. The F-104 Starfighter, first flown in 1954, was the first fighter capable of sustained flight at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. With its needle-nose fuselage and tiny razor-thin wings, it looked more like a missile than an aircraft. Pilots called it the missile with a man in it. It set world speed and altitude records that stood for years. Then came perhaps Johnson's greatest achievement, the U-2 spy plane. In 1954, with the Cold War intensifying and Soviet military capabilities shrouded in mystery, the CIA needed a way to photograph Soviet territory from beyond the reach of anti-aircraft weapons and interceptor aircraft. They turned to Kelly Johnson. In just 8 months, working in complete secrecy, Johnson and his Skunk Works team designed and built an aircraft that could fly at altitudes above 70,000 feet, higher than any fighter or missile of the time could reach. The U-2's first flight was in August 1955. For 4 years, U-2s photographed Soviet military installations with impunity, providing intelligence that shaped American defense policy. When Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960, the incident became an international crisis, but it also proved how vital the U-2 had been to American security. But Johnson wasn't finished. In the early 1960s, he began work on what would become his masterpiece, the SR-71 Blackbird. The mission was simple to state, but seemingly impossible to achieve. Design an aircraft that could fly at Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, at altitudes above 85,000 feet for extended periods, while photographing Soviet territory. At Mach 3, the friction with the atmosphere would heat the aircraft's skin to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. No aluminum aircraft could survive such temperatures. Johnson and his team would have to essentially invent new materials, new fuels, new everything. The SR-71 first flew on December 22, 1964. It remains to this day the fastest and highest-flying air-breathing manned aircraft ever built. During its operational career from 1966 to 1999, no SR-71 was ever shot down despite over 4,000 missiles being fired at them. When an SR-71 detected a missile launch, the pilot's response was simple: accelerate. At Mach 3.2, nothing could catch them. The Blackbird set speed and altitude records that still stand decades after its retirement. Throughout his career, Kelly Johnson developed a management philosophy that revolutionized how advanced aircraft were designed and built. His famous 14 rules for the Skunk Works emphasized principles that seemed radical at the time, but have since been proven correct again and again. Small teams work better than large bureaucracies. A small number of good people can accomplish more than an army of mediocre ones. Keep the chain of command short, 2 or 3 levels at most. Give designers and builders access to each other, minimize paperwork, maximize communication. Design with production in mind from the beginning. Don't create an aircraft that can't be built. Trust your people and get out of their way, and, perhaps most famously, keep it simple, stupid, the principle that became known as KISS. Johnson believed that a first sketch should be close to flight-worthy. He believed that production constraints were part of the design problem, not external limitations imposed afterward. He believed in testing early and often, learning from failures, and iterating rapidly. These principles, revolutionary in the 1940s and 50s, have since become the foundation of modern agile development and rapid prototyping methodologies used across industries. The awards and honours accumulated over Johnson's lifetime like altitude records. The Collier Trophy, aviation's most prestigious honour, awarded to him twice, once for the P-38 and again for the SR-71. The Wright Brothers Memorial Trophy, the National Medal of Science presented by President Lyndon Johnson in 1966, the Presidential Medal of Freedom presented by President Ronald Reagan. He was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. He received honorary doctorates from universities across the country. In 2003, Aviation Week magazine, celebrating the 100th anniversary of powered flight, ranked him number 8 on their list of the 100 most important, interesting and influential people in the first century of aerospace. Alongside Leonardo da Vinci, the Wright brothers, Charles Lindbergh and Wernher von Braun. Kelly Johnson retired from Lockheed in 1975 after 42 years with the company. He had risen from tool designer earning $83 a month to senior vice president and the most famous aircraft designer in the world. But even in retirement, his influence continued. The Skunk Works he had created continued developing advanced aircraft under his protege Ben Rich, the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, the Have Blue demonstrator, and other classified programs that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Kelly Johnson died on December 21, 1990, at the age of 80 in Burbank, California, the city where he had spent his career. The boy from Ishpeming, Michigan, the kid who was ashamed of his family's poverty and got into fistfights over being called Clara, had kept his promise. He had returned in prominence. The name Kelly Johnson meant something. It meant innovation, excellence, refusing to accept impossible as an answer. Today, only a handful of P-38 Lightnings remain airworthy. Perhaps 10 or 15 are still capable of flight, maintained by dedicated collectors and museums who understand their historical significance. Seeing one fly is like watching history take wing, that distinctive twin-boom silhouette unmistakable from any angle, that deep rumble of twin Allison engines, that aggressive predatory shape slicing through the sky. Museums preserve them, collectors restore them at enormous expense, and airshow crowds gather to watch them, cameras clicking, recording every moment. The fork-tailed devil, the Lightning, Kelly Johnson's first masterpiece. When one flies overhead, engines thundering, you can almost imagine what it must have been like. The young pilot climbing into that cramped cockpit surrounded by instruments and switches, 2 throttles under his left hand, the stick in his right, looking out through that greenhouse canopy at the long engine nacelles stretching ahead, those twin booms on either side, starting those Allisons, hearing them cough and rumble to life, taxiing out with that excellent visibility the tricycle gear provided, advancing the throttles, feeling 2,000 horsepower push you back in the seat, lifting off, the world dropping away, climbing into the combat box to escort the bombers, or heading out on a fighter sweep looking for trouble. Was it the perfect fighter? No, nothing ever is. It struggled in the cold skies over Europe. It had mechanical issues that could have been solved with better engines but never were. Some pilots feared it, never trusted it, transferred to other aircraft as soon as they could. German aces shot down many of them, exploiting its weaknesses, proving that even revolutionary designs have vulnerabilities. But it was also the aircraft that gave America a fighting chance when war came. It was the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight. It shot down Admiral Yamamoto, changing the course of the Pacific War. It was flown by America's top aces, Bong with his 40 kills, Maguire with his 38, MacDonald with his 27. It provided reconnaissance that shaped invasion plans and bombing targets. It adapted to roles its designers never imagined: bomber, night fighter, pathfinder, ambulance. It served in every theatre of war, from the Aleutians to North Africa to New Guinea, to the skies over Germany. The critics who called Kelly Johnson's design junk, who laughed at the twin booms and the central nacelle, who said it would never work, who predicted it would kill pilots, they were wrong. The P-38 Lightning worked. It flew. It fought. It killed the enemy. It brought pilots home, and in doing so, it proved something that Kelly Johnson believed his entire life: that sometimes the mad engineer, the one willing to break all the rules, the one who refuses to accept that something can't be done, is exactly what the world needs. Kelly Johnson looked at an impossible specification: 400 miles per hour, 20,000 feet in 6 minutes, long range, heavy armament, and he saw an opportunity, not an obstacle. He looked at conventional fighter design and said, "We can do better." He sketched something that had never been seen before, something that looked wrong to conventional eyes, something that violated every rule of thumb that existed in 1937. He defended it against skeptics, proved it in wind tunnels, built it in a bourbon distillery and watched it fly. That willingness to think differently, to trust the math and the physics and the vision, even when everyone else says you're crazy, that's the legacy of Kelly Johnson. That's the story of the P-38 Lightning, a revolutionary design, born from necessity, forged in combat, and remembered as one of aviation history's great achievements. Not perfect, not invincible, but innovative, deadly, and capable of accomplishing missions no other aircraft could touch. The junk plane that became a Luftwaffe killer in the Pacific and a reconnaissance master everywhere. The mad engineer who proved everyone wrong and then spent the next 4 decades doing it again and again and again. This is their story. A story of innovation, courage, and the refusal to accept limitations. Because sometimes, just sometimes, impossible is just another word for not yet. And Kelly Johnson, the boy who delivered laundry on the back streets of Ishpeming, the graduate student who proved his professor wrong, the young engineer who designed an impossible fighter, spent his entire life proving that not yet can become watch this. The P-38 Lightning, the fork-tailed devil. Kelly Johnson's first gift to aviation, and proof that the mad engineers, the rule breakers, the ones who refuse to accept impossible, they're the ones who change the world.